Welcome to Global Facts. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. This is gonna blow your mind. The Supreme Court just delivered a decision that could reshape presidential power for generations. In a landmark 5-4 vote, the justices struck down President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff scheme, sending shockwaves through Washington and beyond, and drawing intense reactions from both supporters and critics of the administration. The ruling nullifies tariffs imposed under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which had been a cornerstone of Trump's America First trade agenda, impacting industries from steel to automobiles. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, made it clear, the power to tax and regulate commerce belongs to Congress, not the executive branch. Allowing the president unchecked authority in this area, he argued, would undermine the very foundation of the Constitution's separation of powers. This decision is a direct rebuke to the administration's efforts to expand presidential authority and reasserts the constitutional separation of powers, reminding all branches of government of their distinct roles. The court's move signals a willingness to draw clear lines around executive overreach, potentially reshaping the balance of power for years to come and setting a precedent for future administrations. International markets and foreign governments reacted instantly, seeing the ruling as a step toward greater stability in U.S. trade policy. Investors and diplomats alike are now recalibrating their expectations for American economic leadership. For years, allies and rivals alike have faced the unpredictability of Trump's tariffs, often justified on national security grounds. This unpredictability has strained relationships and complicated global supply chains. Now, future trade policies will require broader consensus within the U.S. government, ensuring that major economic decisions reflect a wider range of voices and interests. This is a pivotal moment for American constitutional law and the future of global trade relations, as the Supreme Court reaffirms the checks and balances that define the nation's democracy and shape its role on the world stage. The roots of this Supreme Court case stretch back to the early days of Trump's first presidency, when the administration began to reshape America's approach to global trade and economic policy. In 2018, the administration imposed steep tariffs on steel and aluminum, citing national security under Section 232, a move met with skepticism at home and abroad. The decision was framed as a way to revive American manufacturing and protect critical industries, but it quickly sparked debate among economists, lawmakers, and international partners. The tariffs soon expanded, targeting hundreds of billions in Chinese goods, aiming to protect U.S. industries and pressure Beijing. This escalation marked the beginning of a prolonged trade war, with both sides imposing new duties and restrictions, and global supply chains feeling the strain. But the economic fallout was complex. Manufacturers faced higher costs for raw materials, consumers paid more for everyday goods, and American exporters suffered from retaliatory tariffs. Farmers, in particular, saw overseas markets dry up, while some businesses struggled to stay afloat amid rising uncertainty. Legal challenges quickly followed, with critics arguing that only Congress can levy taxes, and that the president had overstepped constitutional bounds. Lawsuits were filed by trade groups, importers, and even some lawmakers, all questioning the scope of executive authority. These lawsuits wound through the courts for years, setting the stage for a Supreme Court showdown. Lower courts issued conflicting rulings, and the legal uncertainty cast a long shadow over U.S. trade policy. When Trump returned to office in 2025, he doubled down on tariffs, but the legal and political landscape had shifted. Public opinion was divided, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle called for clarity on the limits of presidential power. The judiciary was now ready to confront the constitutional questions head-on, with the eyes of the nation and the world watching closely. The administration's aggressive posture only heightened the urgency, leading to the Supreme Court's decision to hear the case. The stakes were high, with implications for the balance of power between Congress and the president. The stage was set for a historic ruling on the limits of executive power, one that would shape the future of American trade policy and the constitutional order for years to come. The legal fight that led to today's ruling was waged by a coalition of businesses and constitutional scholars. The central question: did the president's unilateral tariffs violate Congress's exclusive power to tax? Plaintiffs argued that Section 232 was used as a pretext to bypass Congress, imposing economic policies the legislature never approved. The Trump administration countered that Congress had granted broad discretion to the president in matters of national security and trade. Oral arguments revealed deep divisions on the court, with some justices concerned that the executive had been given a blank check. Ultimately, skepticism about unchecked executive power proved decisive. The court crossed ideological lines to deliver its landmark judgment. The Supreme Court's 5-4 decision, authored by Chief Justice Roberts, declared the administration's use of Section 232 to impose sweeping tariffs unconstitutional. The majority held that the president cannot unilaterally impose economic measures with major national impact without legislative oversight. The ruling orders an immediate end to the tariffs, with Congress now responsible for any future trade measures. The dissent argued that the court had overstepped by interfering in national security and trade, warning it could weaken the executive's ability to respond to threats. For now, Trump's tariffs are nullified and the administration must halt collection of duties. Congress can still authorize tariffs, but only through open debate and legislation. The decision forces a national conversation about trade policy and the proper balance of power. The ball is firmly back in Congress's court. The Supreme Court's ruling is a political earthquake for the Trump administration, striking down a signature policy just months into his return to office. It undermines Trump's economic strategy and delivers a high-profile check on his authority. The decision reframes his actions as unconstitutional, complicating his narrative as a decisive leader. The White House must now work with Congress or pivot its economic approach entirely. The ruling exposes ideological rifts within the Republican Party, pitting populist protectionists against pro-trade conservatives. It also energizes the opposition, who see the decision as proof of Trump's disregard for constitutional limits. Congressional committees may use the judgment to push for greater oversight. The stage is set for more intense battles between the White House and other branches. The remainder of Trump's term promises to be contentious and closely watched. The economic impact of the Supreme Court's decision will be felt immediately. With tariffs lifted, prices on goods from cars to electronics are expected to drop, acting as a tax cut for millions of Americans. Manufacturers relying on imports will see costs fall, boosting profits and potentially spurring investment. But domestic steel and aluminum producers, once shielded by tariffs, now face tougher competition and possible job losses. International markets have welcomed the ruling, anticipating a reduction in trade tensions. U.S. trading partners may lift retaliatory tariffs, benefiting American farmers and exporters. The long-term effects remain uncertain, as Congress debates how best to support domestic industries. The ruling forces a reckoning over the trade-offs between consumer prices, corporate profits, and industrial policy. The national debate over trade will now play out in Congress, not the Oval Office. Legal and economic analysts agree. This ruling is a watershed moment, marking a significant turning point in the relationship between the branches of government. The decision has sparked intense debate across the country, with experts weighing in on its far-reaching implications for both law and the economy. Anne Marimo, a respected legal expert, calls it a pivotal reaffirmation of the separation of powers. She emphasizes that the ruling sends a strong message about the limits of executive authority, especially when it comes to shaping national policy. The court's decision draws a clear line. Presidents cannot act without explicit congressional consent, especially on economic matters that affect millions of Americans. This sets a new precedent for how future administrations will approach executive action. Economist Abby Van Sickle notes that most consumers and businesses will benefit from lower costs as tariffs are rolled back. However, she warns of uncertainty for industries that relied on tariffs for protection, highlighting the complex ripple effects this decision will have on the broader economy. The decision leaves a policy vacuum Congress must now fill. Lawmakers face the challenge of crafting new legislation to address the gaps left by the court's ruling, a process that could reshape trade and tax policy for years to come. Not all scholars agree. Some argue the court conflated tariffs with taxes and overreached into foreign policy, raising concerns about judicial activism and the proper boundaries of the court's authority. Still, the consensus is that the ruling checks the imperial presidency and reasserts Congress's constitutional authority. Many see this as a necessary correction, restoring balance to the federal government. The Supreme Court has reclaimed its role as a co-equal branch, empowering Congress to shape trade and taxation. This decision is expected to influence how future legal battles over executive power are decided. This is more than a judgment on tariffs. It's a statement about the enduring importance of checks and balances. The ruling reinforces the idea that no branch should dominate. ensuring accountability at the highest levels. The landscape of presidential power has fundamentally shifted, ushering in a new era of governance where collaboration and oversight are once again at the forefront of American democracy. The Supreme Court's decision has sparked fierce public debate, exposing deep divisions nationwide. Supporters hail it as a victory for constitutional order and a necessary break on executive overreach. Critics, especially Trump loyalists, see it as judicial activism, undermining a president's mandate to protect American jobs. The ruling brings the real cost of tariffs, borne by American consumers, into sharper focus. It also intensifies the debate over the proper scope of presidential power. Americans are now forced to confront whether they prefer decisive executive action or a slower, more deliberative system of checks and balances. This fundamental disagreement will continue to shape the nation's political landscape. The Supreme Court's decision is more than a policy reversal, it's a defining moment for American governance. By ruling that unilateral tariffs are unconstitutional, the court has redrawn the boundaries of executive power. Trade policy now returns to Congress, where debate and legislation will shape the nation's future approach. The era of trade by presidential decree is over. Transparency and democracy take center stage. This case will influence future rulings on executive authority, signaling a new judicial willingness to enforce constitutional limits. The decision reaffirms the resilience of America's system of checks and balances. It stands as a historic defense of shared power, a lesson for future generations.